Welcome to Truth Sentinel, watching over the truth in the news. Hello, I hope everyone is well and celebrating the new year in style. Today we're going to be talking about Charles Manson and the Manson Murders. Bit of a strange topic to start the new year, I know, but we will have some more positive topics coming in the new year. Anyway, we're going to go straight over to our guest today, who is Neil Saunders, who we've chatted to before. I hope you enjoy the chat, and as usual, please contact us and let us know what you think with any comments and suggestions. www.truthsentinel.co.uk. Thank you.
Manson said, hey, I want you to go out and kill these people, to go up to this place and kill everyone that is there. And he gave us the orders, the directions, even though we knew where we were going. He gave us all the directions of what to do after we got there and what not to do, and told the girls to write something witchy on the walls. And here I was, a naive Texas boy, without a conscience of really right and wrong, thinking that the world was going to come to the end tomorrow. And going on this journey over to this house to kill whoever was in the house, not knowing how many people were there, who they were, what they looked like, whether they were men, women, didn't know anything about this. Going to this house very reluctantly. My conscience hadn't completely dwindled down to nothing at that time. But it was very close to it, because I didn't have enough to say, hey, I'm not going to do this.
So next up we've got Neil Saunders, who's been with us a few times before, author of Your Thoughts Are Not Your Own and a couple of other books. I won't bother with too much with an introduction, as Neil's been on a couple of times already. So welcome back, Neil.
Oh yeah, thank you very much for having me back.
It's great to have you. I wanted to see if there was any parallels really between what you see in the internet propaganda programs these days and the politics and the fake news with the Charles Manson stories and the Manson murders.
Well, yeah, kind of, to be quite honest, because it's my contention that basically, essentially the mainstream story is a lot of nonsense.
And Manson himself says that. I was just watching a few interviews with him, and he says it was nonsense, and he wasn't there. Everyone makes a lot about the manipulation side of things, though, that he inspired these people to go and commit those murders. Do you think there's anything in that?
No, not really. I think that basically, I think he possibly gave him some advice onto how to carry off a potential crime. He certainly was at the first crime scene because he went back at 4 a.m. To basically help them clean up because they'd made a right hash of it. And he went to the LaBianca house to try and get a mysterious black book that never turned up. And then he left, basically. So the murders essentially were Tex's deal. And Manson was on the periphery of it. Tex is the person that actually killed the people, and say rather than be called the Tex Watson murders, they became known as the Manson murders, essentially. I mean, here's an interesting point, and you'll have heard Manson say this, that basically, and this is not an exoneration of Manson. Manson should still be in prison. He's an accessory to at least 6 murders. He's a drug dealer. He's a car thief. He's a rapist. He's a pimp. So he should be in prison. In some ways, it seems like he kind of thrives in prison anyway and wants to be there. Well, when he was originally let out in 1967, he begged to stay because he'd become institutionalized. So yeah, he was basically said, "Yeah, they're crazy out there. I'd sooner stay in here. I'm quite happy. I've got everything that I need. I can sort of bip around and play my guitar." But one of the things that you'll definitely have heard him say is that basically, I could have told you exactly what went down with it. They didn't give us a chance to, they didn't let us put on a defense. And people often take that to be, hyperbole or, the ravings of a lunatic or whatever. The trial went on for over a year. Do you know how long the defense was on for?
No.
30 seconds.
Blimey.
The defense opened and said, the defense rests. That's it. That's the entire case that the defense made.
Wow. I mean, I heard that Charles Manson wanted to represent himself, but they wouldn't let.
They did
he was
initially.
So manipulative that he might convince the jury he was innocent.
He might, yeah, absolutely. In fact, he was allowed to make a statement to the court after the conviction had come in. But basically, the jury was not allowed to be there lest he hypnotized them with his powers. Yeah. Which is, it's completely ridiculous. And regardless of what you think about the guy or whatever, that's not a fair trial. The trial should have gone to mistrial at least 3 or 4 times, basically. Like, witnesses were found to have lied. Witnesses were found to have been given information. The President Nixon actually declared Manson guilty, and a newspaper that had their headline "Nixon declares Manson guilty" was smuggled into court and shown to the jury. I mean, that was a bit of a sneaky trick, but essentially what that should have done is there's no way that he could not have been influenced by that, and it should have led to a mistrial. What's interesting is that Manson was actually offered an immunity deal. He was offered 18 months if he basically rolled over on Tex.
Really? Yeah, because some of the others were offered deals as well, weren't they?
Well, yeah, Linda Kasabian was. I mean, originally what happened was basically Susan Atkins was offered a deal. She started bragging about the murders in jail. She was arrested for the murder of Gary Hinman, which Bobby Bosley had actually done, but she was present at the time. And the reason that Bobby Bosley was killed was not to go and steal $20,000 from him to take back to Manson. It was actually to do with a gentleman called Danny DiCarlo, who was a straight Satan motorcyclist. What happened is Bobby Bosley had bought $1,000 worth of mescaline from Gary Hinman, who was a mescaline dealer. He'd sold it to the straight Satans, and it had been cut with strychnine, and it had basically made a couple of people really ill. Straight Satans came into the ranch and basically said, "Bobby, you need to sort this out, otherwise we're going to kill you." Danny DiCarlo gave him a gun, sent him off, and told him to beat Gary Hinman around the head with it. So Danny DiCarlo was actually the person that gave him the weapon, told him to do it, and he was the reason for Gary Hinman actually being killed. At the trial, Danny DiCarlo was the material witness that came up with the theory that they went there to get $20,000 for Manson. Now, Susan Atkins was in prison, and she was basically a bit scared, so she started bragging. She started telling everybody that she had killed Sharon Tate. She actually told about 5 people before the person that eventually decided to go to the police decided to go to the police. And a lot of the things that Susan stated were completely untrue. Like, she was just there's debates as to why exactly she was saying this story, because what was strange was before she actually, or on the same day really that she started telling people about this, she'd been approached by 2 lawyers. One was called Richard Calabero and one was called Paul Caruso. And these were incredibly expensive lawyers that usually dealt with people, how shall we describe them? Well-dressed Italian businessman type clients. And for some reason they approached this penniless girl and basically said, "Yeah, we'll take your case." Completely pro bono. But what they did was they recorded her confessing this story, this wild story of how they turned up to advance the plot of Helter Skelter, which was a race war between black people and white people that Manson wanted to kick off by killing a load of rich celebrities. This was the story that she told, and how they went up to Cielo Drive completely at random, broke in and killed everybody there. Now, what was strange was that the 2 lawyers took this story and took it directly to the Los Angeles Times, and it was serialized. It was later put into a book called The Murder of Sharon Tate. What was it called? I think it was called The Murder of Sharon Tate. I could be completely wrong about that. It was the first book that was ghostwritten by Susan Atkins. And basically this was released and became a bestseller before the trial had started. Some people might suggest that was slightly strange. Now, just before the trial started, essentially Susan Atkins changed her mind. Says that basically she was coerced into doing this. She was told that if she didn't go along with this, she'd be sent to the gas chamber and she'd never see her son again. And so she basically changed her mind, said this is completely nonsense. At which point they went to Linda Kasabian, who was also a co-defendant at the time. And they basically just really PR'd her image as being not really involved with the case and being there almost completely by accident.
And she was supposed to be standing outside, wasn't she, and not really took part in it.
Yeah, now if you actually look at it, basically when they first arrived, there was a lad called Stephen Parent that was there. And he was visiting a chap called William Garretson in the back of the Cielo Drive. Now, the story is that they came across him as they were entering, and Tex went up, cut him with ran up to him, put his hand out and said, "Halt." He then stabbed him with the knife so severely in the left hand that it cut his wristwatch. And the wristwatch stopped at 12:15. Now, the official story says that they were there at 12:45. Well, that's obviously wrong then. And then shot him in the face. So we're to believe that he was running up to this person with the knife in his left hand and the gun in his right hand. That doesn't sound.
Wouldn't the gunshot have alerted people in the house as well?
You would think so, wouldn't you?
You would think so.
So what actually happened was basically the reason they were there was because Linda Kasabian and Tex Watson had bought a batch of MDA off Wojtek Frykowski. This had been a particularly bad batch of MDA, so bad the Canadian drug dealer Billy Doyle that had supplied this to Wojtek Frykowski had been filmed being raped by Wojtek Frykowski at Mama Kassa's house 3 days prior as punishment for these bad drugs. These bad drugs were sold to Linda Kasabian and Tex Watson. Basically, what happened was Jay Sebring was a drug dealer. He had a series of a large amount of drugs delivered there by a gentleman called Joel Rastow, who was the boyfriend of his secretary, Charlie McCaffrey. And he delivered a shipment of drugs on the night of August the 8th. Tex had arranged to go and get some of these drugs, turned up, and decided rather than pay for them, he was going to rob them. That's it. That's exactly what happened, basically. The robbery went wrong. He decided, basically, I'm going to take Sebring down to his house, because that's where he stashes all his drugs, being that he's a drug dealer. His clients included the Rat Pack, apparently Marilyn Monroe and the Kennedy crowd, the Camelot crowd, Steve McQueen, Peter Sellers, Warren Beatty, Yul Brynner. Yul Brynner, despite being bald, would go to Jay Sebring's hair salon 2 or 3 times a week, and nobody thought that was odd.
That was a bit odd.
Well, Neil McQueen, who's Steve McQueen's wife, basically confirmed that Steve McQueen was a drug dealer and was the main drug dealer for the Hollywood set, essentially. So what happened was Tex is trying to take Jay down to his house. Sharon panics and makes a run for it, and he punches her or stabs her. He stabs her on the front porch, and we can tell he stabbed her on the front porch because basically that's where all the blood is. And she lay there for a long time dying on the front porch. Stephen Parent saw this and so reversed so fast out of Cielo Drive that he knocked over the fence and nearly went over a ravine. Now, realistically, the first person that would have got to him who had a knife was Linda Kasabian. That fact needed to be ignored because she became the material witness for the prosecution.
Right,
but Linda Kasabian must have been the person that stabbed him, and then Tex shot him. He then went back and stabbed Jay Sebring. They took the drugs and they went. Now, where did they go? There's this story that basically on the way home, they stopped off. They were washing themselves using the hose. Have you heard this? And basically they came out and said, "Excuse me, what are you doing here?" So, we're just using your hose to get a drink. We're hiking through the valley or whatever. Mm-hmm. And these people, the Webbers, they were called. They apparently phoned the police. Now, one thing that's never mentioned about the Webbers' house is that it backs onto Jay Sebring's house. So if you were going to go into Jay Sebring's house, that's perhaps where you would want to park so that you wouldn't be seen going through the front.
That's strange because also, I mean, originally the Manson family didn't get arrests for this murder. They were originally arrested a couple of times for robberies before they were kind of accused of being involved in these murders, weren't they?
Well, they were running a stolen car parts, and they were stealing cars, turning them into dune buggies, and selling on engines and stuff like that, as well as prostituting out the girls, and also, if you get the timeline of how the family sort of went on, they were going up and down the West Coast, down to Texas, up and down the West Coast, down to Arkansas, up and down the West Coast, down to Alabama, up and down the West Coast, down to Southern California. It's like, well, they're going to Mexico and picking up drugs, aren't they? And then they're taking it up and down the West Coast. Throughout a lot of them admitted that this is what they were doing, they're selling drugs. Dean Martin reportedly used to buy cocaine from Charles Manson.
There seems to be a lot of celebrities connected to her, and
Oh yeah.
wasn't he using his women, basically pimping out his women to kind of gain favours with some of these celebrities as well, like the guy from the Beach Boys,
Dennis
Wilson, yeah.
I'll come on to that in a second. Just to basically, so what happened was Tex got back to the ranch at about sort of 2 a.m, and Manson was there, and he hadn't actually previously been there. He wasn't there when they left. He was in San Diego, but he spoke to them over the phone. Now he came back, and this explained what had happened, and he was like, "You've ballsed that one right up, haven't you?" So they got back in the car. Somebody else went with them. It's not been determined whether it was Nancy or Clem or who, but somebody else went with them because there's a bloody boot print there that has never been identified. And they went back to Cielo Drive to basically muck about with it. They pulled Sharon's body inside, which is shown by the way that the blood smears are in the police report, pulled Jay's body inside and started to hang them up by the rafters. Jay was still alive, and so he shot him. He then Wojtek and Abigail Folger, who'd been tied up at this point, basically got free and tried to escape, at which case all hell broke loose. And this is why you're getting the reports of screaming and gunshots at 4 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
Because they went back and had to finish them off, essentially. Now, the suggestion has been made that, and this is highly contentious, that basically the reason they went to the LaBiancas on the second night was because the LaBiancas were somehow connected to Joel Rostow. In fact, Rosemary LaBianca had made a huge amount of money from an illegal mail fraud scam that was run with Joel Rostow. Joel Rostow was the drug dealer that dropped off huge amounts of drugs at Cielo Drive the night before. So whilst the evidence isn't terribly, it's quite thin, in fact. It comes from sort of anonymous confessions and hearsay and conjecture, a couple of vague quotes, and a couple of connections in her life. But it would explain a lot of aspects about the LaBianca killings. Why there was no struggle. Why? Because they knew them. They knew each other. They didn't expect them to kill them, basically.
So these were the murders where they kind of did all their writing as well, like, in blood, death to pigs and things like that.
Yeah, well, what happened with that was that basically when Bobby killed Gary Hinman, Gary Hinman was involved in sort of radical left-wing politics, and so what he tried to do was make it look like he was killed by some friends of his from these different societies, perhaps even the Black Panthers. And when the killings happened at Cielo Drive, there was a vague idea that was running through it that if we can make it kind of look similar, then perhaps Bobby will get off, and also perhaps it'll put the it was a clue, it was a distractionary clue. There's even a suggestion, they wrote pig on the door. That was initially thought to be Pick. Pick Dawson was a drug dealer that used to live with Mama Cass, and he was friends with Billy Doyle, who was the man that was raped, and Tom Harrigan, who was the person that supplied the MDA, and he also knew Wojtek Rakowski. He also strangely knew that Jay Sebring had a penchant for arranging mock hangings at his parties, at his drug parties. So the suggestion again has been made that basically what Tex was trying to do was make it look like it was this collection of drug dealers, Pick Dawson, Thomas Harrigan, Billy Doyle, and Thomas Carruthers. And that theory again is borne out because after the initial suspects for the murder were Pick Dawson, Billy Doyle, Thomas Harrigan, because essentially Mama Cass and John Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas, who knew these people because they were all basically buying drugs from them, says, "Oh my God, well that's obviously Pick. That's Billy. Billy's killed Wojtek as a retaliation for the rape that happened," which was witnessed by Dennis Hopper. Dennis Hopper wrote about it, apparently. So yeah. But the celebrities is, that's why it was such a big cover-up, because essentially all it was a grubby little drug murder. That's all it was. But you've got all these celebrities that are sort of intertwined with it. Like Dennis Wilson. He's living with Dennis Wilson. Dennis Wilson was trying to put an album out. He signed Charles Manson and Bobby Beausoleil to Brother Records, which was the Beach Boys record company. They were recording an album. They'd recorded sessions at Brian Wilson's private home studio.
Yeah, he'd invested money in Manson.
Invested
as well,
a huge amount of money in Manson, basically, because Terry Melcher and Greg Jacobson were trying to do an album with an accompanying documentary. Terry Melcher met Manson in 1968. Which is a year before he claimed to have met him. Terry Melcher claimed to have met Manson twice. It's nonsense. He knew him for over a year. Manson had visited Terry Melcher. This came out in court 5 or 6 times at Cielo Drive. Before Roman Polanski moved in, Dean Morehouse lived there. Dean Morehouse was one of the so-called family, and he was in jail for a time. So the person that kept his room was Tex Watson. So Tex Watson used to live there. Mm-hmm. So it's not a random attack at all. They knew each other. Manson had met Sharon. Dennis Wilson introduced Sharon to Manson at Elvis Presley's house. Because she used to go to Elvis Presley's house. There was a party circuit. Cielo Drive, which was owned by Terry Melcher and later Roman Polanski. Dennis Wilson's house, Elvis Presley's house, Mama Cass's house. And there was just this ongoing drugs party that was going throughout the entire thing. And Manson was ingratiating himself in the music industry. Basically, he'd gotten in through certain people that he met when he was in prison. One of them was Phil Kaufman, who went on to be the road manager of the Rolling Stones. And he basically put him in touch with people like Gary Stromberg at Universal Studios, and allowed him to go over there and, get some work there. And the other people that he knew through his cellmate Alvin Creepy Carpus, or that he was again sort of introduced and ingratiated to, were Frankie Carbo and Mickey Cohen, who were very, very prominent mafiosos. He also knew Frank Costello. What's strange is he met Frank Costello just prior to coming out of Terminal Island, or McNeil, sorry, and he all of a sudden knuckled down and did a car mechanic course. And the thing that people don't see is like, well, wouldn't that teach him how to start cars without keys and get inside cars without keys and that sort of thing? Wasn't he a prolific car thief? So this is how he got into playing in certain clubs and basically got on in. But how he met Dennis Wilson was initially he met him at Gary Hibman's house, basically. They were both buying mescaline there. And so they sort of knew each other as casual acquaintances. As I say, Manson was a drug dealer and a pimp. So he was able to sort of get into certain circles.
I think he did offer some of his women to Wilson as well.
And his men.
Oh, really?
Well, Manson was bisexual. If you're involved in a Manson orgy, it's bisexual. Dennis Wilson was involved in Manson orgies. There are certain quotes from Manson and from Sandra Good and various other people that were close to him that basically suggest that Dennis Wilson and him were actually more than good friends. They had a lover-type relationship.
So do you think a lot of these celebrities benefited from Manson being locked away then?
Well, I think basically it was just an embarrassment. The problem if they'd have told the truth would it would expose the fact that it would expose several things. The fact that Roman Polanski and that sort of set, Jay Sebring was a drug dealer. It might have exposed who his clients were, which really couldn't have come out. It would have exposed basically the other thing that was found at Cielo Drive, which the LAPD confiscated and then tried to sell, were celebrity sex tapes. And some of these were bisexual as well. There was Mama Cass in an orgy with Warren Beatty and Peter Sellers. There's Peter Sellers in a homosexual video with Yul Brynner. There's Ronald Reagan's wife, Jane Wyman, in one of them. There's one with a black guy and Sharon. There's a suggestion that there was some bestiality ones as well. And so this was the point. It's a grubby little scene that we've got going on here, and they just really didn't want to do that. And if you look at the way that the police investigated the case, they just kept losing clues. They really, really didn't want to bother to solve the case until they they almost were forced to, and they were forced to by two things. One, the gun that was used was found by a boy called Stephen Weiss. He'd handed it in because there was a reward offered, $25,000 by Peter Sellers, Warren Beatty, and Yul Brynner. You might notice that those are the people that appeared in the sex films, and they were also the clients of Jay Sebring. So why on earth would they want to, let's get this solved very, very quickly. And the police just claim to have lost this gun that he found. Well, his dad was annoyed with this, so he threatened to go to the newspapers. And only when he threatened to go to the newspapers to sort of highlight their ineptitude did the police go, all right, yeah, fair enough.
Did they find the gun again?
Yeah, found it again.
Yeah. That's a coincidence, isn't it?
Isn't it, basically? So to me, it looks like they just really didn't want to solve the case. And then when they did solve the case, or seemingly solve the case, they had to do it in such a way that the motive was not apparent. That there was no way that this motive was going to get out. I mean, well, the interesting thing about, say, the concept of helter-skelter, which is that basically Manson believed that there's a race war coming down, that basically black people and white people would get into an apocalyptic war, blacks would win, but they wouldn't be able to hold on to society because of their inexperience. He would go to the desert where he would live in the bottomless pit until his numbers swelled to 144,000, at which point he would come out of the bottomless pit and take his rightful place as king of the world.
So he sounds like he's mixed up the Bible a bit, maybe.
Well, what that is, that's not Manson. That came from a chap called Paul Watkins claimed that was what Manson said. Now, what's strange about that is that word for word, that is the exact doctrine of a guru or a cult leader called Krishna Venter that was in Box Canyon, California in 1940. Krishna Venter believed in a race war. Krishna Venter believed in orgiastic sex. Krishna Venter believed that he was Jesus Christ and the devil. Krishna Venter believed in a bottomless pit in the middle of the desert where when this race war was raging, he would go until his followers numbered 144,000, at which point he would come out of the bottomless pit. Does any of this sound familiar?
Mm-hmm.
So that's where that came from. The rest of the concepts of him hating black people came from Danny DiCarlo. Danny DiCarlo just so happened to be on a federal drugs and weapons charge and basically be behind the Gary Hinman murder. It was it seems very apparent that what he did was basically concoct a story or go along with the prosecution, because I think it was the prosecution that concocted the story right from the second they got Susan Atkins to confess, in order to create this theory.
Just time for a quick break to tell you a bit about this show and let you know about some up-and-coming guests. Hello, I'm Scott, host of Truth Sentinel. We do weekly podcast shows covering topics connected to psychology, philosophy, political corruption, conspiracies, mysteries, world events, paranormal, and scientific advancements. Our episodes are recorded from diverse locations such as the UK, Ukraine, Israel, Egypt, Kazakhstan, Portugal, Vietnam, and Thailand. Find us on YouTube and also listen to us on the networks. Feel free to make a donation or buy a t-shirt, which gives us a small donation too. Use the code TRUTH1 for a 10% discount. Thanks for listening. That 10% discount for t-shirts can be found at trutht-shirts.com. That's trutht-shirts.com, and use the code TRUTH1 to get your 10% discount, and we get that small donation. What about the swastika then he carved onto his forehead?
Basically, the swastika he carved onto his forehead, which he's explained a few times. It's taken from he says it's a sun symbol that basically, and again, this isn't an exoneration of Manson. I am under no illusion that he's a nice person. But basically, he met an Indian called Walks on Top when he was in who'd been in Alcatraz, and he sort of, I think they met through Creepy Carpus. And what happened was Manson was thrown into this cell with Walks on Top in order to get this guy to beat him up because he hated everybody. And bizarrely, they got on like a house on fire. And Walks on Top had a swastika tattooed on his forehead, and he said that it was a sun symbol to protect him from white people. Now, here's the strange thing about Charles Manson. Basically, when he is explained, he first X'd himself out of society by carving an X into his forehead. And then he changed it to a swastika. And the suggestion that he changed it to a swastika is also possibly because at the time he was in prison and everybody knew that he hated blacks. So he had to align himself with the Aryan Brotherhood, which is obviously a Nazi prison gang. He was later kicked out of the out of the Aryan Brotherhood because he wasn't racist enough. Now, here's another strange thing that is never spoken about Charles Manson. One of his good friends when he was in prison was Geronimo Pratt, the Black Panther. This comes from Geronimo Pratt's own biography. In fact, at one point, Manson saved Geronimo Pratt's life, which, again, it makes the whole thing far more complicated. It's not an exoneration. It's just basically what you've been told is nonsense. What's interesting about the Beatles as well, that I think, the connection to the Beatles, that, again, is not true. Manson's not a Beatles fan. It was Paul Watkins and Susan Atkins that were Beatles fans. This concept of the Beatles jiving with the Bible and such like that, it seems to be a complete fabrication. I mean, a lot of the things as well. On the day that he was supposedly in Death Valley, telling his followers about Helter Skelter and how it's coming down fast, blah, 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 blah. It's very important that they put him in the desert on that date, the prosecution, because you know really where he really was? He was at John Phillips' house at a New Year's Eve party, hobnobbing with people like Jane Fonda.
Manson himself said he was with some woman. I can't remember which woman it was.
I was with loads of Jane Fonda, Angela Lansbury's daughter, Dina Martin, who's Dean Martin's daughter. They met Debbie Harry, but I don't think she got involved with them. He slept with Peter Falk, who played Columbo, apparently, and Robert Conran, who was the star of the TV show Wild Wild West. Both of those men turned up every day to court, by the way. So yeah, this is the point. This is exactly why they had to create this concept of a hippie cult leader. This nonsense of like how to scale to this. It was a nonsensical verdict as well, really, because basically they were all convicted of murder. It was acknowledged that Manson hadn't actually done anything. He just ordered this, apparently. So there was the bizarre thing whereby he was responsible for other people's actions, but they were also responsible for their actions, which is self-contradictory. He wasn't convicted on conspiracy, he was convicted on murder. Now, he should have been convicted on conspiracy, because, as I say, he helped clean up, and he was at both scenes, and he knew what was going down. He must have known that Tex had a beef with Wojtek. He must have suspected that this would have gone on, but it's nothing really to do with him. He's got that sort of, well, what he calls it is walk the line, basically. It's like, it's none of my business.
At least we can say he's an accessory to murder, but
oh, definitely.
But probably didn't deserve the amount of years he's been.
He should have been in prison before, because basically, whilst he was out on parole from 1967 to 1969, the amount of infractions that he never got a job and he never had a permanent place of residence. Okay, which is that's what you need to be on parole, and he just never did that. He constantly was being arrested for possession of drugs, driving without a license, statutory rape, suspicion of rape. I'm pretty sure he was picked up a couple of times on suspicion of violent crimes, weapons possessions, all sorts of things. It's ridiculous. He should have gone back.
He'd spent a few decades in prison before the murders, didn't he?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah. I mean, he'd been out for about 3 years in the 50s, and then went back in for about 8 years. So yeah, when he came out when he was 33, and he basically spent the majority of his life in prisons, or, you know, the equivalent of like Borstals and boys' homes and stuff when he was very, very young as well. So yeah, I mean, he had a pretty rough upbringing, to be quite honest. But
his mother didn't sound all that caring.
She wasn't. Yeah, you could say that basically. She didn't take her parental duties as seriously as others might. She wasn't a prostitute, which is what a lot of people say. She's basically a bit of a tart, really.
I mean, some people apparently it's quite difficult to get to really track down his early child because it has to come from him basically, and people don't really trust what he says. Like he said, his mum tried to sell him at one point.
No, he didn't say that.
Basically
what happened was when he was out in the 60s, he bumped into a bloke called Newell Emmons, who did him a favour. He got him some car parts. Newell Emmons had been in prison with him before, in Terminal Island, I think. And basically, many years later, Newell Emmons bumps into him in Vacaville. Vacaville, what happened was Manson was getting pissed off with prison, so he decided to act crazy to get sent to Vacaville, which is the state medical facility. And it turned out to be a really stupid idea, because basically they just tranquilized him up and the guards would beat him up. And it was at this time that he started sending letters out to gossip magazines, talking about all the celebrities that he'd known and had sex with and such. And basically what happened was Newell Emmons said, "Can I write a book? I'll ghostwrite a book for you." In exchange for that, Manson said yes. The book that Newell Emmons turned out, basically what happened was he originally wrote the truth. He wrote exactly the truth, which is what I've told you. The text basically went there as a drug murder. There's possible suggestion that LaBiancas were involved in that thing as well, and the cover up to save, celebrities' face and stuff like that. And the publishing company turned around and said, "No chance. You're not putting that out." So they basically changed it and went along with Bugliosi's manufactured Helter Skelter story. You see, Bugliosi had offered Manson a couple of deals as well. Like, Manson's actually sort of like said in a few interviews, like there's an interview with a woman called Michael Ben Horan, and he's getting pissed off with her because she's basically being a bit gobby and trying to sort of rile him up. And she says, "I'll tell you exactly what happened if you want. You won't believe me, but I'll tell you." And basically he goes into this long rambling speech about when Lucky Luciano and they got a prostitute on the stand to lie about him, then the entire court system went down. So what you get in is situations where basically I'm being held up so that the East Coast Mafia can bring a Rambo and put him into the films. Now what he's actually saying is that basically the people involved at Paramount Studios that were connected to Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski, people like Robert Evans, were all deep in the drug game and money laundering and mafia involvement of the film industry. And what he's making a suggestion is that film stars like Al Pacino and Sylvester Stallone and other Italian actors actually had the backing of the mafia. And in order that basically this whole sort of can of worms was not exposed, they just pinned all this crap on him, because you start picking at threads and who knows where it's going to lead. And again, this is borne out. Sidney Korshak, who's in the mafia, basically was Robert Evans's lawyer friend. He got Al Pacino to be in The Godfather. Al Pacino was not supposed to be in The Godfather. He was contracted to be in a film called The Gang Couldn't Shoot Straight. Sidney Korshak phoned up this person. His contract went missing. And all of a sudden, he was free to do The Godfather. So
are you telling me Sylvester Stallone was in the mafia as well, then?
No, of course he wasn't in the mafia, but basically because of the films that he was, the studios that he was working through, there was incredible pressure exerted on the managers of artists and the studios to use these particular artists who were used, as cash cows, essentially. Mm. I mean, Manson wasn't in the mafia. He wasn't even, affiliated or anything like that. But he knew some mafia people. When he was out in the 50s pimping in Hollywood, when he had an agency called Three Star Entertainment in Beverly Hills, his partner was Tony Cassini. Tony Cassini was under FBI observation because he was a member of the mafia.
Right.
You see, so there's this organised crime thing that runs through it, which also begs the question as well, why on earth would Manson per se want to be going off and killing people like that? And starting, I mean, like the Helter Skelter thing's nonsense, aside from the fact that, why did they stop? If that's the point, to start this race war, why did they stop doing it? It hadn't achieved anything. They would have kept going.
Would it be true to say that Manson didn't physically take part in any of the murders, any of the three murders that you've talked about anyway?
No, he didn't. He shot Bernard Crowe, who was a black drug dealer that Tex had ripped off, and he thought that he'd killed him. He genuinely thought he'd killed him, but no, he didn't. Manson has possibly killed a couple of people in Mexico when he was younger. He has alluded to that.
And do you think he was manipulating or encouraging people to kill, or was he just, like you say, cleaning up and aware of what was going on, but didn't actually encourage it?
Yeah, basically. Yeah, no, this concept of being a cult leader is not true. That it's far. If you look at if a lot of people go, well, what about the girls? Look at the way that people acted around him. Look at the way that people fawned around him. Blah 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 blah. Yeah, you know how you know who else girls act like that around? Pimps. Like, what he's doing is he's finding the most vulnerable girls that he can. All of them come from broken homes. All of them have got father issues, and he makes them call him daddy. Who else does that? Pimps.
Did he not have a kind of ideology as well that was sort of tied in with Scientology?
Well, he was a Scientologist, but there's 2 points as well. The one thing is that, do you know what Helter Skelter actually was? Helter Skelter was a nightclub that he set up at Spahn Ranch. Now, we know this to be a fact because the police shut it down. Basically, he had a gambling thing going on at Spahn Ranch, and he called it Helter Skelter. That's where the door came from, that they produced as evidence. It said Helter Skelter's coming down fast on it. And that was the proof of his apocalyptic race war. It was the name of his club. Do you know the family, the concept of the family? That was the name that his group was given by Terry Melcher, the Family Jams. There wasn't really a family. There was a group of people, well, there was a bloke, and some people who were stealing cars and running drugs with him, and then his stable of girls. And it makes a lot more sense when you look at it like that, basically. The Scientology point, this is where you get all the concept that he was connected to groups like The Process and the Kirk Order of Dog's Blood and stuff like that. Because what happened was essentially he studied Dianetics. He was never a member of the Church of Scientology, but he was given auditing by a chap called Lanier Raymer. And Lanier Raymer wasn't really officially affiliated with the church either, but they had enough of a working knowledge to apply it to his daily life, basically. He sort of took bits from lots of different religions. The one thing that he talks about mostly is the concept of Abraxas, which is actually a sort of dualistic black and white type, yin-yang type God thing, as opposed to this sort of Satan Jesus concept, which sort of ties people to the Process Church. What happened was essentially, after the murders happened, it came out in England that Manson was connected to Scientology. I mean, they got it wrong. They said that he was actually a church member because Bruce Davis, who was connected to him, had been working at Scientology Church in London. And so basically the British tabloids latched onto this and went, oh, wow, so this Charles Manson guy's Scientology. Wow, that's interesting. And they approached the Church of Scientology for for a chat and a quote. What happened was, just prior to this, the Process Church of Final Judgment had started, and it was an offshoot of the of Scientology, and so they'd been labelled suppressive peoples by the Church of Scientology. So what they did was they killed two birds with one stone. They scuppered up their former friends, and they directed the attention away from them. So they put out a series of stories in the British tabloids claiming to be Process members, or basically claiming intimate knowledge that Manson was connected to the Process Church and that the Process Church was satanic. What happened was Vincent Bugliosi saw this and realized, that's it. I'm going to leak this, and then that'll give the concept to the public that this cult is plausible. Because there's all these cults flying around. Now, Ed Sanders, who wrote The Family was the book that I always thought was the best, because that talks about the Process Church and all these hidden cultic ins and outs and stuff like that. And it wasn't until many years later that I realized where Ed Sanders had got all his material from. Ed Sanders had got all his material fed to him directly from Vincent Bugliosi. He didn't go and investigate this. He didn't find this out from other sources. He was told everything about the process by the prosecution, who was trying to concoct this image of a cult. Well, that means the information isn't credible.
So you would say that Manson didn't really have a cult. It was more like a harem then?
Yeah, he was a pimp and a car thief and a drug pusher. And he had all these things going on. And he lost his record contract because basically what happened was they found out that he'd shot Bernard Crowe. And so they dropped him and they dropped Bobby Beausoleil. And that did cause a bone of contention. There was a fight between Terry Melcher's mates, Terry Melcher's like bodyguards, and some people on the ranch. But essentially, he'd not really fallen out with Terry Melcher. He actually was seen at Terry Melcher's Malibu house after the murders. He knew Terry had moved. He didn't have a grudge against Terry Melcher at all. That's a total misnomer that he went to the house where Terry Melcher used to live to, get his revenge on the record industry. It's just not true.
What do you think we can learn from all this then?
That people sometimes have ulterior motives, and sometimes that there are two strands to the story. Because, as I said, there's the official story with Charles Manson, and then there's the sort of Ed Sanders story as well, basically, which is actually fed from the official source as well, that most people don't realise. So you've just got to sort of check things, basically. There's still a lot of things that are really sort of loose about it that you'll probably never know. There's a suggestion in court. Sandra Good walked up to Doris Tate, who was Sharon Tate's mother, and said, "We're so sorry. We were told that Sharon wasn't going to be there." Now that's interesting. What happened was, whilst Roman Polanski was in London, he tasked his good friend Robert Evans to look after Sharon for him. And Robert Evans dutifully visited her every single day whilst Roman was
good
away,
of him.
except the Saturday that she was killed, when he phoned. And you know what Sharon told him? She told him she wasn't going to be there. She was going to go and stay at her friend Sheila Wells's house. That's curious, particularly when you know the cocaine angle, particularly when you know that basically Robert Evans was convicted of cocaine. I think he was caught with 5 ounces. It's also very strange when you know that he was connected to the Cotton Club murder, the murder of Roy Radin by a gentleman called Bill Melcher. Bill Melcher was a drug dealer that used to knock about with Mama Cass. So again, same circles, same people coming up again and again and again. And these are the things that just couldn't have been exposed. There's just no way that they're going to, you can't start pulling on these threads because you just don't know what's going to get be on the end of it, basically. And
Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate didn't have the most traditional of relationships anyway, I don't think.
No, he was having an affair with Michelle Phillips. She was, making pornographic films with different people. She described their relationship as, "Oh, it's brilliant. He lies to me and I pretend to believe him." They were going to split up, but basically she got pregnant. And they were heavy drug users as well, despite what he said in the press. Previously, she'd been out with Jay Sebring, and prior to that, she'd been out with Steve McQueen. So, again, same people. Steve McQueen's wife, Neil McQueen, was pursued by Johnny Rosselli. Johnny Rosselli was the mafia figure that not only helped facilitate the Bay of Pigs, but also made the director of From Here to Eternity an offer that he couldn't refuse in order to revitalise Frank Sinatra's career. Frank Sinatra was on the supposed celebrity death list that was produced by Susan Atkins, of all the people that the Mansonites were going to kill. Frank Sinatra was Jay Sebring's premier client. The woman that Susan Atkins confessed to in jail was a girlfriend of Frank Sinatra's.
Blimey, it's all intertwined, isn't it?
Strange, isn't it? When you start, this is the point. You start pulling at one thing, and it's very, very muggy and mucky. Yeah,
it is indeed. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Unfortunately, but thank you very much for coming on and tell us about the unofficial story of Charles Manson. When's your book coming out then, Neil?
Well, it's not quite finished, but it's dangerously close to being finished. Basically, it's almost at the stage where I need to send it for proofreading. So.
Okay, great. And if people want to keep in touch with when it does come out, what's your website again?
NeilSandersMindControl.com.
And that's where you'll put details on there at some point.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've been keeping a bit quiet about it because usually when I mention stuff, I jinx it. So, but yeah, I've been working on it for a while. So
Okay.
hopefully it's going to be out very soon.
Very good, very good. Well, thanks again for joining us, and you must come back and we'll talk about another subject. Do you have anything else after you finish this book? Have you got plans to do anything else?
Well, as I say, hopefully I'll do some Rich Planet show in the next year. I've been looking, as I say, at the things like J-Trig and Project Minaret and just the sphere of the internet, because this is the new media, the internet. This is where people are immersing themselves in.
Yeah, tell me about it. I mean, I'm immersing myself in it too much.
Quite, but that's sort of the way that the world is going. But there are a lot of programs out there from the NSA, GCHQ, MI5, the FBI, the CIA. There's a vested interest in controlling. It's a war out there. It's an information war. And
is there a war on for your mind?
Oh yes, but this is where this fake news comes from. People don't seem to realise this is a hook and bait. Like this is what they're trying to do with this fake news. They are going to use it as a weapon against the alternative media. I'm positive about that.
Well, I think so. They're going to use it. They're going to use it in the same way they use the phrase conspiracy theory.
Exactly. Yeah. And the genius about it is it's not fair. Like it's not fair. And so I understand people's frustrations, and the response is to go, that's nonsense, blah blah blah. Fox is fake news. BBC is fake news, and you're right, and I can show you examples. But you know what? We've got to be a bit cleverer than that. We've got to be really mature and stand up and go, you know what? In the past, perhaps we haven't sourced things as well as we can. The only way we can be seen to be exemplary is to be exemplary. Mm-hmm. You've got to source things. You've got to not look for that clickbait stuff. You've not to, and I know it's tempting, but you've got to not for the greater good, because you're gonna get hoist with your own petard, basically.
And you've got to catch people in the act and take videos of it.
You've got to be able to prove things. This is the point. Otherwise, they will destroy you. And that's what it's about. And this is the problem with the fact of the internet. It's great in some ways, but what's happened is it's exploded a market. And
the thing is, though, right? If you look at some stories, like David Icke says that Ted Heath was a paedophile and used to take kids out on his boat and kill them. That's like, how on earth could you possibly prove that, though?
This is the point. And you know what? If you're in the mainstream, you won't have to. You can put it. You can write it in such a way where I didn't say that. Read the article again. I've said that it's suggested that that's happened. Because that's the favourite trick of it. And I've seen people in the alt media do it as well. And the problem is you won't be able to get away with it in the alt media. Is that fair? No. Is that right? No. Is it a tyrannical tactic? Yeah, in some ways. But I think that's what they're going to do.
Yeah, I think it's good advice anyway to try and back everything up with evidence and do your research. It's always been good advice. But anyway, we look forward to speaking to you again when you've researched your next topic, Neil.
Lovely. It's always a pleasure.
And in the meantime, take it easy and good luck with the book when it comes out.
Thank you very much. Take care, man.
Cheers. Take it easy. Thanks. Bye-bye.
So thanks for listening today, and remember to check us out again at www.truthsentinel.co.uk. Also, buy a new t-shirt for the new year at trutht-shirts.com and use the code TRUTH1 so that we get a small donation. And if you would like to donate, we do appreciate it. Anyway, I hope you have a great new year and achieve everything you're trying to achieve. Thanks very much. Goodbye.